Hi everyone, my name is Jordy and this is Catherine, and today we'll be walking you through our vision for sustainable development in Kuala Lumpur by the year 2050. This is a brief rundown of what we'll be talking through. Context being very important, we'll start with that and then we'll dive into the more technical details of our design and finish everything with predicted GHG emissions, the new urban metabolism for the city, and as well as the UN Goal 11 targets. Broadly speaking, we all know Kuala Lumpur is part of Malaysia, but more specifically, it's part of West Peninsula Malaysia, as you can see here. Zooming in a bit further, here are the districts that form part of the city. And like I said, context being very important, I'll highlight a few key points that will prove to be relevant for our design. First, population is expected to double by the year 2050, going from 1.8 million to 3.6. Climate, very much unlike Toronto, Kuala Lumpur residents enjoy very warm temperatures. They're also very lucky to have about 200 hours of sunlight every month. And being part of a tropical country, Kuala Lumpur also has abundant rainfall amounting to about 2,700 millimeters of rain per year. That's about 3 times that of rain obtained in Toronto. It's a fairly large city, covering about 240 kilometers squared. 2/3 of it being urbanized, with urbanization patterns continually increasing. It's important to note that most of the buildings in Kuala Lumpur are residential, and being a fairly well-known business hub in the world, it also generates most of the Malaysian national GDP.
I'm just going to quickly go over the environmental performance in Kuala Lumpur. This indicator measures the environmental performance on a standardized percentage from the worst performance benchmark to the target performance. This is the overall environmental performance in Kuala Lumpur of 55%. Looking deeper into the various aspects of environmental performance, we can see that it performs the worst in terms of municipal waste, biodiversity, habitat, as well as forest cover. But it's doing pretty well in terms of socioeconomic. So I'm just going to go over the existing infrastructure plans and standards that we consider in our design. First, we have the Kuala Lumpur Vision 2020, and that's developed by the City Hall, where they identified the key development issues touching all aspects within the city and proposed the objectives to be met for 2020. And they're currently developing 2051 because 2020 is coming up very soon. And next, we have the Low Carbon Cities Framework, and that's a national framework that addresses the responsibility of cities to follow models of sustainable development and to implement low carbon strategies. In terms of buildings, there is a Green Building Index in Malaysia, and that's similar to LEED. So it's a comprehensive voluntary rating system for evaluating environmental design and performance of buildings. For transportation, there is a Greater Kuala Lumpur Transportation Master Plan, and this is to increase public transit modal share for Greater Kuala Lumpur conumeration to achieve sustainable economic growth. So kind of like the relationship that Toronto has with the GTA, where we want to focus on the regional growth and not just within Kuala Lumpur. Design missions for our city is to create a vibrant and environmentally aware global community that will inspire other cities and lead by example. First, I'm just going to go mention the economic foundation that Kuala Lumpur has, being part of Malaysia, which is the 6th friendliest country to business. So there's a great potential to attract investors in sustainable development. And realistically, those become important into the future where to implement some of the strategies that we'll be talking about. Next, in terms of sustainable planning, we want to place focus on environmental stewardship over unsustainable planning policies. So not just focusing on economic development, but also looking at environmental and social aspects. And part of that is to drive innovation and best practices in design. As I mentioned before, context is very important, so we want to design appropriately for the geography, climate, and the social culture of Kuala Lumpur. So it's fairly hot. It's a tropical city. It's not like the North American cities and European cities that we also always talk about. So we want to establish Kuala Lumpur as a home to inhabitants and natural plant and animal species. Our inspiration is taken from Kevin Lim's theory of good city form, and more specifically the functional normative theory, where we interpret it as the intersection of sustainable city form and successful human function.
There are 2 notable case studies that we drew heavily from. First being Singapore's solid waste management strategy. In many ways, Singapore and Kuala Lumpur share many parallels, which is why we borrowed elements from this project. Singapore has successfully reduced its solid waste generation output by 90% through recycling program and waste-to-energy power plants. Second source of inspiration comes from Seoul's Riverfront Revitalization Program, which successfully transformed a 3.6-mile-long industrial area to an aesthetically pleasing linear park serving both social and environmental functions. Now going into more detail about our design components, starting with buildings operations. We want to focus on the big users as main drivers. So it's important to note that about 2/3 of all buildings are residential mostly, some commercial, and 2/3 of all electricity used in Kuala Lumpur can be attributed to cooling and lighting requirements. So with that in mind, we're proposing insulation upgrades, which altogether would lead to 15% reduction in cooling loads. And building form and orientation is a very delicate balancing act between visible and heat transmission in buildings. And since Kuala Lumpur is located near the equator, we've identified a 30-degree due-south orientation to be the optimal placement for new buildings, thereby leading to about 40% reduction in solar gains. On top of that, if we add shading elements, that would add another 10% reduction in cooling. And because most of the homes in Kuala Lumpur are fairly tall terraced homes, with the office space being mostly high-rise, these buildings tend to use a lot more electricity during the day inefficiently with light. So by harvesting natural light, we can cut down lighting requirements by about a quarter. Putting all that into our red screen model suggests about a 26% electricity savings in buildings, which when normalized on a square meter basis and then translated citywide, would amount to total electricity savings of about 1,600 gigawatt hour annually.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, there is great emphasis for transportation to be developed on a regional scale. So our focus is divided for a regional transportation plan as well as the transportation plan in Kuala Lumpur. So in terms of the regional plan, it's motivated by a rate of urban sprawl outside of the city, as well as a low motor share of only 16% for public transit, because of the existing network lacking usage because of inaccessibility. The proposed network improvements that we're proposing will meet radio and orbital demands. So this includes extension of existing LRT lines, the implementation of new LRT and MRT lines to address demanding high-growth communities, as well as a circle line to address the orbital demands between regions within Greater Kuala Lumpur, as well as a BRT line to support LRT Line 3 for the additional demand. For the City of Kuala Lumpur, we saw that in the City Hall Vision 2020, they proposed better integration between modes of transportation as well as better pedestrian network, but we didn't see much regarding the bicycle infrastructure. So what we want to do with the bike path is to convert empty space under elevated transit structures to dedicated bike paths where feasible. And this is inspired by the underlying project in Miami. And there are some concerns with, I guess, how feasible this is. Sometimes the elevated structures are located in the middle of the road with roads on the side, but we still predicted that until 76 kilometers of bike paths can be installed in Kuala Lumpur. In terms of alternative fuels, we looked at biodiesel, which gives a 40% greenhouse gas emission reduction, as well as electric vehicles, but this is contingent on the new renewable sources of electricity generation. Just some quantitative analysis numbers, 2050 annual VKT for Greater Kuala Lumpur is around 48 million. About 3% of this can be replaced by bicycling, and around 11% reduced by the various transit routes that were proposed. Now we're going to look at land use. The map that you see right now is the land use from 2005. As you can see, a lot of it is residential with some undeveloped land. But fast forward to 2050, this is what we're proposing for land use, and it's characterized by three main components. First, we have mixed-use development, and the benefit of it is to reduce the need for long-distance travel between zones, and to integrate residential and commercial zones to support cultural practices. Next, the protection of green space and waterways is important because we saw that there's increasing depletion of developed land, and this is the issue identified by Kuala Lumpur City Hall. So the conservation of green and blue spaces can be used for flood mitigation as well as human health benefits. This will be complemented by brownfield redevelopment. So there's some existing ex-landfill sites, abandoned areas, and uncompleted development projects that can be redeveloped into brownfields to reduce that development pressure on green space. Now, this is just a snapshot of our typical neighborhood design, residential neighborhood design on a greenfield land. We're just zooming in. This is the transit services and the street layout with the transit provision of a transit line and bike lane. In terms of buildings, these are typical Malay townhomes equipped with solar panels and rainwater harvesting barrels. In terms of water, there's some infiltration chambers for stormwater, and also there's a provision of green space and blue space with some shading.
So to improve the drinking water supply in Kuala Lumpur, we wanted to focus on diversifying the spread sources from which Kuala Lumpur obtains water to make it an overall more robust system and reducing its susceptibility to droughts. Fast forward to 2050, we anticipate a daily water demand of about 850,000 cubic meter. First strategy would be to install rainwater harvesting tanks on most of the buildings in Kuala Lumpur, contributing to about 570,000 cubic meter. And further exploration in terms of groundwater extraction, studies have shown that continual supply of about 100,000 cubic meter can be achieved. And with desalination technologies, specifically multi-stage distillation process, can achieve about 280,000 cubic meters of water. And in terms of wastewater, we want to increase the recycling rate within the city, specifically by instituting decentralized ICI projects, which can take care of about 1/8 of the total wastewater production in the city, further complemented by residential greywater reuse. In terms of stormwater management, currently there's upwards of 40% land area in Kuala Lumpur being impervious, so it's important to increase the capacity of urban areas to convey stormwater. We're proposing, as part of the already ongoing River of Life project, to expand the riparian vegetation to improve runoff conditions. We're also proposing infiltration chambers underneath impervious spots like parking lots. And another context-sensitive option would be to have retention cells underneath the 150 kilometer of elevated transit route, having potential runoff reduction of about 99% for all water that drains into it. Wastewater is another environmental issue that's urgent for Kuala Lumpur. In 2050, we expect the city to generate 2.2 million tons per year. An analysis suggests that it's mostly food waste, with runoffs being plastic and paper. So our former strategy is to institute a recycling program that has so far not been included, with a recycling potential of about 200,000 tons per year. And anything that doesn't get recycled will presumably go to the landfill, or we're calculating about 2/3 of that can be used within waste-to-energy plants, taking care of 1.4 million tons per year. And of course, energy is a very important part of our design. We're advocating for the use of more renewable, sustainable forms of energy. Notably, you'll notice a complete coal phase-out by the year 2050, and how we're doing that is basically ramping up the solar production capacity in Kuala Lumpur, assuming about a quarter of all roof area is being dedicated for solar panels, and at 20% efficiency, that would bring Kuala Lumpur's solar production to about 54%, thereby reducing the share of natural gas and resulting in overall cleaner electricity grid for Kuala Lumpur.
Okay, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we'll be comparing the 2050 business as usual emissions with the 2050 sustainable development emissions. So that's using all the technologies that are proposed in our study. So this is just a graph of the comparison of the total GHG emissions between the two scenarios. Note an assumption we made that was for the total greenhouse gas emissions, we included other sectors like industrial processes, construction, manufacturing, other fugitive emissions, to give a more accurate representation of the total, even though we're not really addressing them in our design, because for the total. As you can see here, there's some reductions from the energy generation, or the electricity generation sector, from private vehicles and from municipal solar waste. And zooming further into use of electricity, there are significant reductions with regards to residential and commercial buildings, but also a slight increase in public transportation with electricity. So we found that switching vehicles from gasoline fuel to electric based on the grid composition yielded great reductions, and also improvement to clean up the electricity grid yielded greater reductions from the building sector. So the compounded effect of less electricity use with the greener electricity grid. As well, recycling and incineration processes reduce emissions, but incineration does generate some. And we found that for future consideration, we can upgrade incineration to gasification that produces less damaging byproducts. And lastly, as mentioned before, new transportation lines increase emissions, but it's offset by the VPT reduction. So overall, the cumulative effect of our designs resulted in an overall greenhouse gas reduction of 30% from 2050 business as usual levels. But just going back to my assumption that emissions from sectors such as industrial processes and manufacturing are not affected, this is not necessarily true because changes to electricity grid will reduce emissions. So even though we're not addressing them explicitly with our design, there will also be reductions.
And here's a brief overview of what our metabolism looked like in 2016. This is where it would look like in 2050. Notable points include the diversification of water sources in Kuala Lumpur, making it an overall more resilient and robust system. You'll also notice that we've considerably ramped up solar energy within the city, making use of the solar capital that already exists in the city. We've also incorporated multiple cyclical components, especially with regards to wastewater through residential grey water reuse, and in terms of solid waste management, we've instituted recycling program as well as diversion through waste to energy power plants.
So I'm just going to wrap everything up with discussion of the Sustainable Development Goal 11, mandated by the United Nations to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. I'm just going to talk about 4 of around 10 targets that is included in this goal. First being public transportation. So we decided that this can be measured by inventory of the public transportation stops that will be implemented and projected ridership increase. And the results are that there will be a 50% increase in stops within Kuala Lumpur and a projected ridership increase of 140%. We believe that the increased provision of transportation routes is a way of meeting this target for public transportation. Next, we have natural and cultural heritage. This is a fairly qualitative target. We believe that the rehabilitation of Kuala Lumpur's urban rivers, increased provision of new green space, and protection of existing green space through zoning will be able to meet the target. Also, flood risk management. This is actually very important for Kuala Lumpur because flash floods are very damaging in Kuala Lumpur and happens almost monthly during the monsoon season. So the stormwater management strategies that we talked about earlier on will be very effective at reducing the economic damages resulting from water disasters. Lastly, waste management. So this can be measured by the percentage of municipal solid waste that's met with adequate final discharge. So because 72% of waste is incinerated or recycled, and the reduction in waste sent to landfill will result in less sanitary conditions, we believe that this will also be this target.
This concludes our presentation for today. We hope you found it interesting and informative, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.